As all parents know, you need to put aside a lot of money for your children's education. But how best to invest that money to maximize your return? I'm Jack Otter, editor of BARRON'S.com. I'm here with Duy Nguyen, Chief Investment Officer at Invesco Solutions. So congratulations, your company has just taken over the Rhode Island 529 plan. So help me out here. Let's start with parents who expect a child in this year. How should they be investing that money?
There's a couple ways you can do it, clearly, Jack. Let's say you do have a lot of money saved aside already. The best way to save for 529, realistically, is to put it all in at once. So let's say college education is about $250,000. Put all that in now. And what we've done in our studies is if you start today and you put the entire amount in, over an 18-year span, going back 50 years, there wasn't a period in time where you would actually underperform the higher education price index, which is really your bogey, right? So that's what we think of our bogey is. How do we keep up with the price of education? So obviously,
which has been rising faster than inflation for decades.
It has been. It's been about 4% versus inflation around 3%. And so if you have it today, do it now, and then you can almost close your eyes and not worry about it. And you have programs out there that offer that where you can prepay for your college tuition. I'm from Texas. We have that program where you can put down a certain amount of money, and that covers you for any education within a state school. Same concept. If you do it now, it's probably the best time and most prudent time, but clearly, not everyone has that.
And to be clear, we are talking about what it costs today, and your sole goal is to make sure that whatever it costs in 18 years, you'll have that money set aside.
Exactly.
Okay, now, let's say in the case of most people, you don't have that $250,000 set aside. You're going to be putting money in each year. What do you do at the beginning?
So clearly, what we try to do, and I think, what's your goal at the end? And we're a solutions team, we're goal-oriented. Is your goal to have all of it saved up, partially? And thinking that through is quite important. But clearly putting in enough money that you think will accumulate to that point is key. And then there's a mathematical formula that you can work to. You're going to go to a state school, a public school, and things of that nature. The earlier you start, the better, always the case. Just realize that if you start early, that compounds a lot more. And when you start late, that compounds a lot less. Secondarily, you open yourself up to more risks near the end, and we call that shortfall risk. If you start when your child's at 10 or 12, like you mentioned, and you just didn't do anything for 10 years, the way we're going to approach it is that we're not going to be as risky with 8 years, because if you have what you had in 2008, there's no recovery if you're at 80% equities. And so we really focus on each stage of the child's life going to where they graduate as a separate portfolio. And we're much more risky and much more active early.
So with that early stage, what are some of the aspects of the portfolio? For instance, what's the share in equities at age 0?
So it's actually a really good question. Now, you could easily put it at 100%, but in theory, you also think about the journey of the money and then when people put it in. We think the right amount of equity is around 70%. And the rationale is you could go to 100. I made the comment that at 100, you're fine if you have it all at once, but if it's graduating over time, the drawdowns there do matter a lot. And when you put in, so we think, and this is a study we did, so the simple study is you look at 80-20 portfolios versus 50-50 over the last 30 years. The difference in performance, 50 basis points.
Wow.
The difference in volatility, 4%. So dramatic volatility. It's been a good market for fixed income, all that being the case, but the journey matters in this case. And so we start there around 70, 75, and we started to graduate that down.
So at 10 years old, what does that portfolio look like?
It's probably closer to 50% equity. But it also has a little bit less active portfolio, active risk. So we're very active at the beginning. We start behaving more.
In other words, you're using active managers to try to beat the market.
Yes.
And as you move closer to that first day of school, you're going to more passive, just indexing.
Yeah, so you said it well. We start going more passive, and we start going less risky, and we start more and more looking forward towards tying ourselves to the higher education price index so that we move in lockstep. Because right then you're getting close to the end. You don't want to have 150,000 5 years in, and then the market bottoms, and you're worried about making up 50,000. So we start doing all those things to control for that.
So that's an interesting point. At the earlier years, you probably are thinking that the equity market, the stock market, can outperform that education index. As you get closer, your fear is that you don't want to pace the education index. So you said, let's move a little farther, 15, 16 years old, you're moving more into TIPS.
Yes, we are. We would move into...
These are Treasury inflation protected securities that keep up with inflation.
Exactly. And so from that perspective, the key thing here is we move into TIPS, we move into short-term TIPS. Because when you go long-term TIPS, you have the exposure to duration. So that's a key nuance of TIPS is a nuance, shorter term TIPS is a nuance. And I think the other portions of fixed income, we are either going to be safer or we go to floating rate, which tends to be correlated to inflation as well. Okay. So really this thematic thought of lowering your risk and then the focus of higher education price index and how do we outstrip that or at least match it near the end.
So just one more question, because as we noted, colleges, or the price of college has tended to outstrip the CPI. Do you tweak the portfolio at all in those final years to try to get a little extra return, or is that just too risky?
I think that's too risky because however much risk return you want, you expose them to the risk. I think for parents, their psychology, and I should have said this at the beginning, when you think about a 528, it feels like a target date fund, right? The difference is a target date fund is an investment fund. A 529 is a savings plan. The nomenclature actually defines the type of risk that I think that people want. If it was an education investment, then we could be a little bit risky and try to get that. But at the end, I think parents want to know what they have to spend and how much they need to prepare in the next 4 years subsequent. So taking on the extra risk for the commensurate return 2 to 3 years out, I don't think makes as much sense for our investors because I don't think that's what they're looking for at that point.
Thanks very much for your advice.
Thank you very much for the time.